The Senate chambers were a fortress, a place where the most powerful beings from across the galaxy gathered to discuss matters of universal importance. But there was one rule that stood out above all others. Everyone who entered the chambers must wear armor. Every race, every species, every leader except for the humans. It was a mystery that had confounded the Senate for centuries. Why were humans, the newest members to this intergalactic alliance, exempt from the rule that every other being had to obey? For years, diplomats, generals, and even the most seasoned warriors speculated. Some believed it was a form of trust, a sign of respect for the human delegation. Others whispered about a hidden agenda, a secret the humans were unwilling to reveal. But the truth? The truth was far more dangerous than anyone could have imagined. The humans had proven themselves in countless ways, rising from the ashes of war to shape the future of the galaxy in ways no one had foreseen. Their strength wasn't just in their weapons, nor in their cunning strategies, but in something far deeper, something biological. In the heart of the Senate, under the harsh gaze of millions of watchful eyes, the tension had been rising. Every glance, every word exchanged carried weight. The leaders of the galaxy had always looked down on humanity, dismissing their growth as a fluke, their survival as mere chance. But when a human walked into that chamber, unarmored, unprotected by the heavy shields and technology of their counterparts, it was a silent declaration they had nothing to fear. A hush fell over the room as the human representative stood alone, his posture relaxed, his eyes scanning the sea of alien faces. The armored delegates shifted uncomfortably, their advanced technology gleaming under the lights. They were ready for battle, prepared for anything the Senate might throw at them. Yet it was the human who stood fearless, his presence commanding the room. Why was this? Why did they not need armor? The answer lay in the darkest corners of humanity's past, an ancient, forgotten secret that even the most powerful species in the galaxy had overlooked. As the debates continued, whispers spread through the chambers, growing louder by the minute. The human delegate had just begun to speak, his voice calm and steady, but the words were not what anyone had expected. They were not about alliances or trade agreements, but about a forgotten war one that the Senate, in all its wisdom, had chosen to ignore. A war that had never truly ended, a war that now threatened to unravel everything they had worked for. The Senate chamber, once filled with pride and confidence, suddenly seemed like a battlefield. And standing at the center of it all, a human, without armor, might be the one to change the fate of the galaxy forever. But as the first question was raised, the screen flickered, cutting off the signal. Silence swept over the room, and the delegate's face was gone. Had he vanished? Or was this the beginning of something far worse? Something none of them had anticipated. The truth was closer than they thought. And now, it was too late to stop it. The silence in the chamber was thick, like a storm waiting to break. The screen flickered again, but this time, it didn't come back to life. The faces of the delegates, once so confident, were now etched with doubt. In the corner of the room, the human representative's seat remained empty, the chair untouched. No one had seen him leave. This wasn't supposed to happen. The Senate had always been a place of order, a place where every move was calculated, every conversation carefully controlled. But the human delegate had shattered that illusion. His absence was like a crack in the foundation of the galaxy's most powerful institution, one that no one could ignore. The questions started. At first, they were quiet, murmured between allies, a few glanced exchanges. But then they grew louder, more urgent. Had the human been taken? Was he a prisoner, or worse? The armored figures at the long table shifted uncomfortably in their seats, each of them well aware of the power that humanity had displayed, even without the might of advanced weaponry or the protection of armor. They had never fully understood how the humans could walk unscathed, but they had seen the evidence with their own eyes. Now, it was starting to feel like a threat. The Senate was built on alliances and understanding, but all of that had been built on the assumption that they held the upper hand. The human delegation had always been the wild card unknown, unpredictable, yet consistently capable of surprising the most seasoned veterans in the galaxy. And now, with the representative gone, an unsettling thought began to creep into the minds of those in the chamber. What if humanity wasn't just unpredictable? What if they were something more? Something far more dangerous than anyone realized? In a remote chamber far from the Senate Hall, a small team of intelligence officers, human and alien alike, had been monitoring the situation. The flickering screen wasn't a malfunction, it was a signal, a message. But the message was cryptic. All they had was a single phrase: "The war isn't over." The phrase echoed in the minds of the officers, leaving them confused and unsettled. What war? No one had heard of any unresolved conflict involving humanity. The most recent wars had been wiped from history centuries ago. Yet, the phrase carried weight, something more than just an empty threat. Something real. Among the officers, a seasoned human intelligence officer stood frozen, staring at the screen. Her hand hovered over the communication controls. She had spent her life studying humanity's past, its darkest hours, its most brutal wars. The phrase wasn't just a throwaway line. It was a warning, a call for action. Back in the Senate, the debate raged on, but it was no longer about trade or diplomacy or peace. It was about the human representative. What had happened to him? And why had he chosen to speak of a forgotten war? A war that no one had known about until now. An alien senator, a towering figure with shimmering scales, stood up abruptly, his voice booming across the chamber. We cannot ignore this. The human delegation's actions cannot be dismissed. They must answer for this disappearance. His eyes flashed with a mix of fear and anger. We need to act now. A cold shiver ran through the room. The word act echoed like a threat, a sharp realization of what was at stake. What if humanity was no longer just a species trying to fit in with the galactic order? What if they had been waiting for the right moment to reveal their true strength? The doors to the chamber opened with a soft hiss. In walked another human, one who had been absent for the initial meeting. The room went silent again, eyes locking on him. This new representative moved forward, his face unreadable, his hands clasped behind his back. He didn't need to speak. His presence alone was enough to send a chill through the assembly. The atmosphere in the Senate chamber shifted. What had been a place of negotiations now felt like a battleground. But no one knew who was about to strike first. The human representative's arrival only heightened the tension in the chamber. His demeanor was calm, even measured, yet his presence spoke volumes. He was different from the one who had vanished, more experienced, more grounded in the politics of the Senate, yet the same underlying power radiated from him. He walked with a quiet confidence, his eyes scanning the room, his every movement deliberate. He knew exactly what was at stake. As he approached the central podium, the whispers in the chamber grew louder. Some delegates were eager to hear him speak. Others were clearly anxious, unsure of how to interpret the absence of their colleague. Had he been silenced? Had someone removed him for a reason they still didn't understand? And if so, was this new representative here to take his place or to defend him? The human stepped forward, and with a single glance, he silenced the room. The other senators, whose species ranged from cold-blooded warriors to calculating diplomats, felt the weight of his gaze. The human spoke, his voice steady and confident, yet there was something unsettling in his tone. "The war is not over," he said, the words sending a ripple of shock through the chamber. "You all thought it was. You thought humanity had moved on, that we had been absorbed into the greater galaxy. But that's a mistake." The alien senators exchanged nervous glances, confusion and fear creeping into their expressions. What was he talking about? What war? As the human paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle, another delegate, a thin, insectoid being, spoke up. "Explain yourself, human. We are not here to indulge in your fantastical claims. What war do you speak of? And where is your colleague?" His mandibles clicked sharply, impatience bubbling beneath his words. The human representative's eyes darkened, and he took a deep breath. The war that has been forgotten, erased from every record in this chamber. It was never just a war. It was a culling. The word hung in the air like a thunderclap. The culling? It was a term few had heard in eons, dismissed as myth by most. A mass extinction event that occurred centuries ago, where entire species had disappeared without explanation and others were reduced to near extinction. Many thought it was a natural disaster, a galactic anomaly. But now, the human was claiming it was something far more sinister, something deliberately orchestrated. There are those among us, the human continued, who want that war to remain buried. They want you to forget what really happened. But humanity remembers, and we are ready to confront it. The alien senators exchanged glances, uncertainty clouding their faces. They had all studied history, had all been trained to understand the past. But nothing prepared them for this revelation. Was the human right? Had the Senate covered up a war, a culling, so deeply that it was now woven into the fabric of galactic history? And what did it mean for the future? The human's words struck at the core of the Senate's authority. If humanity had been carrying the memory of this war, and worse, if they had been the survivors of it, what did it mean for the power dynamics in this room? Could the Senate, a body that prided itself on maintaining control, be so easily threatened by a single species? As the room fell into a deep silence, the insectoid delegate spoke again, his voice tinged with malice. You claim to know something we don't, but this is nothing but an accusation. Prove it, human. Show us the evidence. Otherwise, you are just another liar looking to disrupt the peace. The human didn't flinch. The evidence is already here, he said softly, his gaze sweeping the chamber. But not everyone in this room wants it to be found. A ripple of shock swept through the senators. The implication was clear. Some of them were complicit in keeping the war buried, in erasing it from history, in hiding the truth. But who? And why? Before anyone could respond, the chamber's lights dimmed. The same flicker that had interrupted the earlier broadcast began again, but this time, it wasn't just a glitch. The screen came to life, showing a blurry image of a warship, old and battered. Its insignia was unmistakable. It was a human ship. The delegates watched, transfixed, as the image cleared. The ship was surrounded by debris wreckage from a battle long forgotten. And in the background, there was something else. Something moving. Shadows in the void. The human stepped forward, his face a mask of determination. You've been warned. The war is coming again. The screen went black, and the chamber erupted into chaos. Questions flew through the room, accusations, demands for answers, but the human representative remained silent, his eyes never leaving the screen. The room felt smaller, suffocating, as though the very walls were closing in on them. The war was coming, and the Senate had no idea how to stop it. The chamber buzzed with frantic energy, the air thick with confusion and fear. Delegates shouted over each other, their voices rising and falling in a chorus of disbelief. The human representative stood at the center of the storm, his face unreadable, but his eyes, those eyes were locked onto the screen. There was no escape from it now. The Senate was no longer in control. The war had been reignited. The insectoid delegate, his body rigid with frustration, was the first to speak, his voice barely containing his anger. This is madness. You've given us nothing but riddles and threats. You think we're going to believe in your ghost ships and shadowy figures? His mandibles clicked menacingly, his fury evident. Prove it. Show us the truth. A murmur of agreement rippled through the chamber, but the human representative didn't flinch. Instead, he turned his gaze to the far corner of the room, where a small, darkened viewport revealed the stars outside. The truth is out there, but it's not here yet, he said, his voice low but carrying through the silence that followed. The chamber's atmosphere grew heavier, more oppressive. It wasn't just the words that had unsettled them. Something bigger than they could comprehend. The Senate, built to maintain order and control, was now a prisoner of its own lies. And that terrified them. Another delegate, a reptilian being with glistening scales, stepped forward, his eyes narrowed in suspicion. If there's one thing we've learned from humanity's history, it's that your kind is always looking for a fight, he hissed, his tail flicking irritably behind him. You're not going to drag us into another pointless war, human. The human's lips curled into a slight, almost imperceptible smile, but it was enough to send a chill down the spines of those present. "It's never been pointless," he said, his tone colder now, his eyes flashing with something darker. "You think you can ignore what's been buried? You think it won't come back for you?" Humanity didn't survive the culling by sitting idle. His words hung in the air like a heavy weight. Some of the delegates looked away, unable to meet his gaze. Others were too proud to back down, their postures stiff with defiance. But the truth was undeniable. They had underestimated humanity from the start. And now, they were beginning to understand the depth of their mistake. Suddenly, the room's lights flickered again. This time, it wasn't just a malfunction. The screens around the chamber came to life in unison, flashing images that none of them had ever seen before. A fleet of human ships, old but still powerful, moving through the stars like shadows in the dark. But there was something off about them. They weren't alone. The lights dimmed further, and the flickering became more erratic. The shadowy figures from the previous image emerged from the depths of space, moving with purpose, as though drawn to the Senate itself. The human representative stepped forward again, his face grim. "The time is coming. You've ignored the signs long enough, and now they're here." The insectoid delegate's antennae twitched violently, his voice strained. "Who are they? What do they want?" But the human didn't answer. Instead, he turned back to the viewport, watching the stars with a cold intensity. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. The ship images grew clearer, closer, and then, with a sudden, jarring realization, the entire chamber seemed to hold its breath. It was the human fleet. But this time, they weren't alone. A dark figure loomed in the distance, a silhouette against the backdrop of distant stars. It was massive, larger than any ship the Senate had ever seen, a warship unlike anything in their archives. Its design was unfamiliar sleek, almost haunting in its simplicity. But it was unmistakable. This ship wasn't built by any known species. And it wasn't just a warship. It was human. The entire chamber erupted in chaos again, as senators scrambled to make sense of what they were seeing. The question was no longer about the war that had been hidden. It was about the war that was about to begin. And the truth was, no one knew how to stop it. As the viewport flickered once more, a single voice, low and steady, broke through the noise. "They're coming for you," the human delegate said, turning slowly to face the chamber. "And when they arrive, you'll remember that we've always been here. We've always been ready. And now, it's too late to turn back." The ship loomed ever closer on the screens, the silence growing unbearable. And in that moment, the weight of humanity's past and the price of their survival settled on the Senate like an unstoppable force. The door was closing. The war was at their doorstep. And the human delegation was the only thing standing in their way. What happened next would change everything. The ship loomed larger on the viewport, its dark silhouette growing more imposing with each passing second. The room fell into an eerie stillness, the senators unable to tear their eyes away from the screen. The human representative stood tall, his expression cold and resolute. But just as it seemed like the truth was finally unfolding, just as the chamber was on the verge of understanding the war they had long forgotten, a new sound pierced the tension. A low hum began to vibrate through the floor, deep and resonant, almost like a heartbeat. The lights flickered again, this time with an unsettling irregularity, casting long shadows on the walls. Then came the voice. It was faint at first, almost imperceptible, but it grew louder, more distinct. A voice they all recognized, but one they never expected to hear. The voice belonged to the missing representative, the one who had vanished without a trace. But this time, there was something different in his tone. It wasn't the same person who had addressed them before. This voice was colder, more distorted. "You should have left it buried," he said, his words carrying an eerie weight. "Now, you've all signed your death sentence." A collective shiver ran through the Senate. The human's eyes widened slightly, his jaw tightening. It wasn't the shock of hearing his colleague's voice again. It was the unmistakable dread that filled the air. Something had changed. And it wasn't just the appearance of the human fleet. It wasn't just the ship in the distance. The voice continued, its tone growing more menacing. You thought you could silence humanity, forget the culling. But the ones who erased us, they've awoken. And now you're all going to pay for your complacency. A ripple of confusion passed through the chamber. Who was this? Who had really spoken to them? The room buzzed with nervous energy, but before anyone could make sense of it, the lights in the Senate chamber cut out entirely. Total darkness enveloped them, the hum of the unknown growing louder, vibrating through their very bones. For a moment, there was nothing but silence, the kind of silence that clings to the air after something truly catastrophic. And then, from the shadows, came a blinding flash, an explosion of light so intense, the delegates were momentarily blinded. When their vision cleared, the human representative was no longer standing at the center of the room. The spot where he had been was now empty, replaced by a cold metallic figure, its form distorted and twisted. It looked almost human, if humans had been built to withstand the harshest environments, if their bodies had been forged from something far more durable than flesh. The creature's eyes gleamed with a chilling intelligence, its gaze fixed on the assembly. The human representative's voice echoed once more, but now it was a disembodied sound coming from the metallic being. "You think this is a warning?" The voice asked, dark and mocking. "You are wrong. The true danger was always hiding in plain sight." For the first time, fear began to creep into the hearts of the Senate. They had thought they were facing a human rebellion, a fleet of survivors seeking revenge for the culling. But this was something altogether different. The ship, the voice, and now this creature, it was clear they had all been part of a far greater scheme, one that had been set into motion long before any of them had even realized. And just as they began to process the magnitude of the situation, the creature turned its head toward the viewport once more. Behind it, the human fleet had stopped moving. The massive ship they had seen earlier wasn't just approaching. It was waiting. A soft, almost imperceptible sound came from the speakers like the distant hum of something huge shifting. It was subtle at first, but it grew louder, vibrating through the chamber's walls. A low, rumbling growl. A growl that wasn't from the creature. The senators stood frozen as something outside the viewport moved into view. Something far larger than the fleet. Something they never anticipated. It was an entire fleet of ships, their designs as alien and terrifying as the creature now standing among them. And behind them, a shadow, no, a mass swirled in space, moving closer, its sheer size dwarfing everything around it. The human fleet had not come to save them. It had come to join a much darker force. The creature's cold smile widened, and its voice echoed one last time, now devoid of any warmth. The culling wasn't an event. It was an invitation. Before anyone could react, the metallic being vanished into the shadows, leaving the senators to face the terrifying reality of what was coming. A war unlike any they had ever imagined, led by humanity and an even greater force behind them. The chamber doors slammed shut, and in that moment, no one knew how they would survive. The entire Senate chamber was plunged into chaos. The senators, now trapped within the walls, faced the terrifying truth of what was happening. The dark metallic figure stood motionless at the center of the room, its eyes still glowing with that same cold, calculated gaze. The massive fleet outside, an unholy alliance of humanity's long-lost warships and the alien force that had accompanied them, loomed large in the viewport. The hum from beyond the walls had grown deafening, as though the universe itself were preparing to collapse in on them. A silence settled over the room. No one moved. The creature spoke again, its voice now calm, but full of menace. "You all thought you could erase the past, bury it in the void of space. But history is a terrible thing to ignore. You will remember." One by one, the delegates' faces grew pale, their once proud exteriors cracked under the weight of the realization. The creature was right. They had forgotten. Humanity's past wasn't just buried, it had been erased, hidden, lost in the fog of time. And now it was back. No, not just back. It was stronger than ever. And it wasn't just a human revolt. They had unearthed a force older, darker, and more dangerous than anyone could have fathomed. The human representative, or whatever had taken his form, stepped forward, and the chamber doors slowly began to creak open behind him. The hum outside intensified as the chamber trembled. But this time, it wasn't from fear. The force outside was drawing closer. And as the doors finally swung open, the delegates saw the true scale of the disaster that awaited them. The massive warship, the one that had been waiting, wasn't just an ordinary ship. It was the vessel of the forgotten, the true origin of humanity's ancient enemies, a species far older than the Senate had dared to consider. The senators gasped. Standing behind the human fleet were beings enormous, terrifying, and not of any race they had encountered before. Their bodies seemed to flicker in and out of existence, made from the fabric of space itself, as though they existed outside of the normal laws of reality. These were the ones who had cursed humanity's past. These were the ones who had caused the culling, not out of malice, but out of fear that humanity would one day uncover the power they had once wielded. The human representative, no. You didn't think the past would stay buried forever, did you? They are the true force behind the culling. And now, he paused, letting the weight of the moment settle on the senators. Now they are back, not to destroy humanity, but to control it. To take what we've always had, what they once feared, and use it to conquer all. A deadly stillness descended as the enormity of the situation finally sank in. The senators had been blind to the true war they were in. They hadn't been facing a rebellion, they had been facing an awakening. The human fleet wasn't their salvation. It was a reminder of what humanity could become when pushed too far. A warning of what had once been. And it wasn't just a call to arms. It was a call to enslave. But just as the delegates tried to comprehend the weight of this revelation, the unexpected twist came. One of the representatives, a young delegate from a far-off star system who had stayed silent until now, stood and took a step forward. Her eyes were wide with shock, but something else flickered in her gaze. Something dangerous. She was the last person anyone had expected to speak. She had been a mere observer, a neutral party, not even in line for any power. But now, her voice cut through the tension. "It's not them," she said, her voice steady. "It's us." The room fell deathly silent. All eyes turned to her as the weight of her words began to sink in. She stepped into the center of the room, facing the creature who had taken the form of the human representative. "The power we've been hiding, the one you've all feared, it's not from some ancient enemy. It's ours. We've always had it. We've just never dared to unlock it." The creature's eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about?" it hissed, clearly unnerved. The young delegate smiled, a dark, knowing smile. "You've underestimated humanity," she said, her voice ringing clear. "We've always known how to survive, and we've always known how to evolve. It's not the culling that was the plan. It was the awakening of something far more dangerous." And with that, she raised her hand, and the chamber around them began to tremble once more. But this time, it wasn't from the enemy's advance. This time, it was from something else entirely. A force far more ancient, far more powerful than even the ones who thought they controlled humanity could ever comprehend. As the room went dark once more, the creature's voice echoed through the silence, filled with dread. "No, no, this cannot be happening." And then everything went black. The darkness hung in the chamber, an oppressive weight on everyone's shoulders. The silence was thick, as if the very air had been stolen from the room. For what felt like an eternity, nothing moved. The creature, once a terrifying symbol of the unknown, of humanity's forgotten past, was frozen in place. But the young delegate, standing tall amidst the shadows, wasn't afraid. She was waiting, anticipating. And then, with a soft rumble, the lights flickered back on. But the room had changed. The metallic creature, once so imposing, was now crumbling. Its form started to shift, disintegrating before their eyes, as though it had never truly been solid at all. The true power that humanity had kept hidden, its potential, its will to evolve, to adapt, was finally unlocking. It was as if a dormant part of humanity's consciousness had been awakened, revealing a depth of strength and resourcefulness that no one had fully understood. The senators watched in awe as the transformation unfolded. The delegates who had once been so sure of their dominance now stood at the mercy of the force that had been quietly growing among them. The power the young delegate had hinted at wasn't some external weapon or ancient enemy, it was humanity itself. The drive, the ability to evolve and overcome, had always been there, dormant, waiting for the right moment to awaken. And now it had. The human representative, who had been lost to them all this time, emerged from the shadows, not as an enemy, but as a symbol of humanity's true strength. He walked to the center of the room, his eyes filled with a quiet understanding. He had always known what humanity was capable of, and now the Senate had seen it for themselves. It wasn't just about survival. It was about rebirth. Humanity had always been capable of rising from the ashes, of pushing past the limits others tried to impose on them. What you've feared, what you've hidden from all these years, is the very thing that will save us, the representative said, his voice filled with conviction. Humanity's strength has always been in its adaptability. It's time for the galaxy to learn that we can't be controlled. We are not some forgotten relic of the past. We are the future. The creature, now nothing more than a pile of metal and dust, was nothing but a reminder of how far humanity had come and how much farther they were willing to go. The alien force, the ones who had once sought to dominate, now watched helplessly as the tide shifted. The ship outside, the massive vessel they had all feared, was slowly moving away. It wasn't retreating, it was being forced to. Humanity had discovered something far greater than any weapon or army. They had rediscovered their own potential. The young delegate who had sparked this change stepped forward. Her eyes met those of the senators. "This is just the beginning," she said softly. "We have only scratched the surface of what we can achieve." With that, the delegates left the chamber, each of them feeling the weight of the truth they had just witnessed. Humanity wasn't just a force to be reckoned with, it was the catalyst for a new era in the galaxy. No longer would they be silenced or erased. No longer would they be underestimated. The Senate had learned that the true power of humanity wasn't in armor or weapons, but in their ability to adapt, survive, and, most importantly, evolve. As the last of the senators exited the chamber, the young delegate stood alone for a moment. The stars outside the viewport shone brighter than ever before, a reminder of the vast universe that now awaited them. It was no longer a universe ruled by fear or domination. It was a universe open to new possibilities, to alliances, and to humanity's undeniable place at the center of it all. And as the lights dimmed one final time, a voice soft but sure whispered across the chamber, "It's our turn now."